There is no surviving portrait of Catherine of Valois, no painted likeness. And yet, we may still have her face, not in a gallery portrait, but in a wooden effigy carved nearly 600 years ago. And today, we're going to examine what survives, what the records tell us, and attempt to reconstruct how this 15th century queen may have been seen at her final farewell. So before we get to the effigy, let's get to know our muse. Catherine of Valois was born in 1401 at the Hotel St. Paul in Paris, into a world shaped by war and instability. She was the daughter of King Charles VI of France and Isabeau of Bavaria, a royal household defined as much by power as by uncertainty. Her father would become known as Charles the Mad. Throughout Catherine's childhood, he suffered severe and recurring episodes of mental illness, at times failing to recognize his own family, at times turning violently on those around him. During these periods, her mother, Isabeau, stepped into a political role unusual for a woman of her time. Catherine was the youngest surviving daughter of the French royal family, though not the first to marry into England. Her older sister, Isabella, had already become Queen of England at just 6 years old, wed to Richard II. From the beginning, Catherine's life was shaped by conflict. The long war between France and England we now call the 100 Years' War. Her own marriage was negotiated for years, a key piece in attempts to end that conflict. When she finally met Henry V in 1419, contemporary accounts suggested the famously stoic, battle-hardened king was immediately taken with her. Political necessity arranged the match, but there appears to have been genuine admiration, perhaps even affection. In 1420, the Treaty of Troyes was signed, a dramatic turning point in the war. As part of its terms, Catherine married Henry in France. Henry was recognized as regent of France and heir to the French throne. And Catherine, still a teenager, became Queen of England. Her coronation followed in Westminster Abbey in February 1421. For a brief moment, her life seemed almost charmed. She gave birth to a son, Henry, the future Henry VI, in December of that year, while her husband campaigned abroad. By medieval standards, their marriage appears unusually warm. Plans were made for Catherine to join Henry in France, leaving their infant son safely behind. They reunited only briefly. While called away by war once more, Henry fell ill. In August 1422, at the height of his power, with a young queen, a long-awaited heir he had never seen, and the French throne seemingly within reach, Henry V died. Catherine was 21 years old. Her son, not yet 1. In the years that followed, she appeared beside her son at ceremonial occasions. Her role public, but increasingly constrained. Parliament passed a statute forbidding a dowager queen from remarrying without the king's consent, a law likely to target Catherine herself. Gradually, she faded from public record. Yet quietly, and against expectation, she chose her own path. Sometime in the late 1420s or early 1430s, she married the Welshman Owen Tudor. Their union produced children who would stand close to the throne, among them Edmund Tudor, father of King Henry VII, making Catherine the grandmother of the Tudor dynasty. Catherine of Valois died at Bermondsey Abbey on January 3, 1437, just 35 years old. Some historians suggest childbirth complications. Her will indicates she may have endured a prolonged illness. Her funeral took place the following month. But Catherine's farewell was not her final appearance. For nearly 300 years, her body remained above ground, visible to visitors, and recorded by curious observers. We'll return to that strange chapter later. Few queens have shaped the future of England so profoundly, not through conquest or rule, but through the choices she made, and through the son and grandson she left behind. And yet, for a woman who stands at the origin of the Tudor dynasty, we know remarkably little about her. Her appearance, her personality, even large stretches of her life. What survives is not a portrait, but a figure carved in wood. In the Middle Ages, beginning in the 13th century, funeral effigies were sometimes used to represent kings, queens, and other royal figures at the moment of death. The practice gradually declined, with effigies no longer carried in royal funeral processions by the late 17th century. In many modern funerals, there is a visitation, a moment when the body can be seen and people gather to say goodbye. Funeral effigies served a similar purpose. They were life-sized figures placed atop the coffin while a body lay in state or carried during funeral processions. Modeled after the deceased, they might wear wigs of real human hair. Their faces were often formed from death masks, molds taken shortly after passing. They were dressed in royal garments and adorned with crowns, scepters, rings, jewels, fur, and gold. The visible language of rank and bloodline. Not every monarch had one. For some, we simply have no record, but several did survive. Today, a number are preserved at Westminster Abbey. Though damaged and restored over centuries, especially during the Second World War, they remain astonishingly human. Unlike the idealized stone figures on tombs, funeral effigies were painted to resemble flesh. If taken from a death mask, they preserve something incredibly rare, the contours of a real face. They sit somewhere between portrait and body, between life and memory. And because they were carried publicly, seen by subjects, and displayed at moments of national transition, they were also political objects, projecting power and continuity in the face of death. Let's take a closer look at what survives. Better photographs are available online, and I encourage you to seek them out. However, this is the only image I can legally use here. No surviving account of the effigy's construction has yet been identified. The slender figure stands 5 feet 4 inches tall. It was carved from a single piece of wood, believed to be oak, and hollowed at the back, likely to reduce weight and prevent cracking. The antiquary, W.H. St. John Hope, who examined the effigies in 1907, described it this way. The head and neck are well modeled, including the ears. Round the skull is a groove for a wig and crown. The body is shown covered by a tight-fitting dress, cut square at the neck, and painted throughout a bright vermilion. That vermilion surface was never meant to be seen. It is not her final costume, but a carved and painted undergarment, intended to be entirely covered by real fabric. Physical traces of those lost garments remain. Writing in 1951 after examining the Abbey's effigies, historian and antiquary R.P. Halgrave Graham noted, nails round the edge held fabric, of which I recovered a minute scrap, identified as red, regular warp satin. An arm is broken away at the shoulder, the other survives, but is missing its hand. Beneath the carved gown, her shoes are still visible. In 1907, Hope recorded that they showed traces of gold in color. They are, however, somewhat broken. At some point in its long history, the tip of the nose was knocked off and later restored. During conservation work, a few strands of human hair were recovered and identified as brown by Dr. Holden of the Forensic Laboratory. That detail does not conclusively prove Catherine's natural hair color. The strands may have belonged to a wig, but it is one of the only physical clues we possess. And then there is the face. Later examinations observed that Catherine's effigy differs noticeably from others in the collection. Halgrave Graham wrote, Catherine's pathetic face shows clearer signs of derivation from a death mask than do the other carved heads. The mouth is small and the eyelids are heavy. This is significant. Artists often soften the effects of death, smoothing features, reducing irregularities, reshaping the face into something more ideal. Catherine's effigy does not resemble an idealized portrait. It resembles a body. When I first encountered it, I struggled to reconcile this face with descriptions of her beauty. Time has darkened the surface, paint has flaked, damage has altered the contours. The heavy lids and hollowed planes are intensified by centuries of wear. But if a death mask was used, then what we are seeing is not artistic failure, but an unsettling closeness to reality. As for Catherine's looks, some authors have described her as blonde, though I have not been able to trace that claim to a firm source. Others speculate about darker eyes, inherited from her mother. Victorian and later artists tend to depict her with darker hair, but those images reflect 19th century taste, more than 15th century evidence. What we are left with is fragmentary. 2 brown hairs, a carved face, heavy eyelids, a small mouth. At a certain point, we must acknowledge that imagination fills the gaps. With that in mind, I have created several reconstructions, primarily using brown hair and darker eyes, and another with lighter features. I'll let you decide which feels the most convincing. This effigy was not created to flatter. It was created to represent presence, to stand in for the Queen at the moment of her passing, before grief gave way to memory. We've all seen AI images claiming to reconstruct the faces of historical figures, but how accurate are they really? If you've ever used it to transform your own or family photos, you've probably seen results that range from eerily familiar to completely wrong. And that's before we consider a deeper issue. We don't truly know how accurate historical images were to begin with. Portraits of monarchs were never neutral. Artists worked within conventions, prioritized symbolism. They followed templates. They answered to powerful patrons. Youth could be preserved, strength exaggerated, flaws softened, or erased entirely. Elizabeth I tightly controlled her image, ensuring her portraits never reflected her aging face. Many surviving portraits of Anne Boleyn were created decades after her death, shaped by politics as much as memory. Henry VIII commissioned portraits of family members after they were gone. His parents, his sister, Jane Seymour. What were those artists working from? A memory? An earlier likeness? An ideal? So when we talk about accuracy, we are already standing on uncertain ground. The Victorians, famously fascinated with the medieval world, filled books and galleries with imagined scenes of Tudor and medieval life. They sketched queens in elaborate dress, illustrated executions, marriages, and coronations, moments they had never witnessed, rendered through the artistic language of their own time. And yet, they helped generations connect emotionally with the past. What we're doing here isn't fundamentally different. We're reimagining history using the tools of our own time, not to replace evidence, but to briefly step into this space before time altered it. We've looked at what survives. Now, let's ask how it was meant to be seen. Unlike some of the monarchs I've covered in earlier episodes, no detailed eyewitness account of Catherine's funeral procession survives in published form. The sacred rolls from Westminster Abbey record offerings and retained goods, but they are not widely digitized or fully transcribed. We know they exist. Historians cite them, but they remain just out of reach. To understand how her effigy may have appeared, we turn to royal precedent, including the funeral of her husband, Henry V. At Henry's funeral in 1422, chronicler Thomas Walsingham recorded, "There was placed upon the chest in which his body was a certain image, very like in stature and face to the dead king, arrayed in a long and ample purple mantle, furred with ermine, a scepter in one hand, and a round gold ball with a cross infixed in the other, with a gold crown on the head over the royal cap, and the royal sandals on his feet, and in such wise he was raised on a chariot that he might be seen of all." Henry's effigy did not survive. While we lack a poetic description of Catherine's procession, we do have institutional evidence preserved by Westminster Abbey where her effigy remains today. The Abbey states, "Her painted wooden funeral effigy on the hearse was robed in a satin mantle, surcoat, and tunic, all furred with ermine. Crown, scepter, and rings were all of silver gilt." That single sentence gives us the clearest description of her final public image. She was not displayed plainly. She was presented in full royal dignity. Further records note, in 1437, the Abbey retained items from Catherine's effigy after her funeral, including a gilt crown, a gilt scepter, 2 rings, and what may be 2 armbands, all silver. These were not symbolic wooden props. These were real, valuable, precious objects. In other words, monarchy did not end at death. It was staged, structured, public. Catherine died at Bermondsey Abbey on January 3, 1437. Her body lay in state at St. Catherine's by the Tower, then was conveyed to St. Paul's, and finally to Westminster Abbey. Her funeral took place on February 10th. Records note, many nobles attended the funeral, when 59 cloths of gold were offered at the Mass. 26 banners were offered in her honor. This was not a modest burial. This was a funeral of a Dowager Queen of England and mother to the King of England and France. Her 15-year-old son, Henry VI, attended as chief mourner, an unusual and powerful gesture. So although we lack a vivid narration of her effigy raised upon a chariot, we do not lack evidence of splendor. So, we know the garments were satin and ermine-lined. We know she bore a crown, scepter, and rings of silver gilt. Silver gilt is silver dipped in gold, so it would have had a gold appearance. We know banners and cloths of gold surrounded her. If tradition was followed, her effigy would have been carried in procession and placed atop her coffin as she lay in state. I've chosen colors and silhouettes appropriate to the mid-15th century, garments befitting a Dowager Queen of England. AI can be unpredictable. It tends to drift towards fantasy interpretations of medieval dress, and too many specific details can distort the result. So these images are not perfect, and they're not definitive. As in previous episodes, I'll display several numbered versions of Catherine's effigy so you can look more closely and decide which feels most convincing to you. While those are shown, we'll briefly touch on the strange centuries that followed when Catherine's remains remained above ground and she earned the haunting nickname of a real-life Sleeping Beauty. If you'd like to explore her life further, I've linked my Fairy Tale Lens episode below, where I retell a fairy tale version of Catherine's life story through the framework of Sleeping Beauty. And if you enjoy this kind of historically grounded reconstruction, subscribing, liking, or commenting truly helps the series continue to grow. Catherine was interred in the Lady Chapel of Westminster Abbey in 1437, close to but not beside her first husband, Henry V. During the Tudor reign, Catherine's grandson, Henry VII, began rebuilding that section of the abbey into what we now know as the Henry VII Chapel. As part of that reconstruction, Catherine's coffin was removed from its original resting place. The rebuilding was extensive, and amid shifting plans and unfinished work, her remains were left above ground. At some point during this process, she was placed in a new coffin near Henry V's tomb, lid unsecured, her body no longer concealed, and there she remained, visible for nearly 3 centuries. In 1669, the diarist Samuel Pepys recorded seeing her body during a visit to the abbey. He wrote, "And here we did see, by particular favor, the body of Queen Catherine of Valois, and I had the upper part of the body in my hands, and I did kiss her mouth, reflecting upon it, that I did kiss a queen, and that this was my birthday, 36 years old, that I did first kiss a queen." By the 18th century, her remains had become something between relic and curiosity, viewed by visitors to the abbey. After centuries of exposure and mistreatment, she was finally placed in a vault, and in 1878, under Queen Victoria, Dean Stanley ordered a more permanent and respectful burial beneath Henry V's chantry altar, where she rests today. And here's the irony. An effigy had once been created to preserve her dignity, to stand in for the Queen at the moment of farewell. Yet centuries later, it was the body itself that became the spectacle. Not a sovereign, not a queen, but an object of fascination. The wooden figure was meant to be temporary. The body was meant to rest unseen. And perhaps it is fitting that today, it is the effigy, not the spectacle, that allows us to remember her with dignity. I hope this episode helped bring back the story, the memory, and the legacy of a French princess and a long-ago queen. If you'd like to explore more royal effigies, you can continue the Effigies of Power series from Elizabeth of York to Henry VIII, linked in the description below. Thank you for watching. Meet the Muse.